Hello, welcome. My name is Kungo Wangmo Upshaw, and I'm the acting director of the Newport Beach Public Library Foundation in Orange County, California. Thank you for inviting us into your homes this evening. Since the pandemic began a year ago, Zoom has become part of our daily lives. This evening, we welcome our loyal members and new guests from near and far to the Library Foundation's virtual auditorium. What you need to know about this program is that we are recording it, and if you want to ask a question, use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. The 24th season of the Witte Lecture is made possible by all the sponsors you saw in our slideshow, plus all our ticket holders, dedicated foundation members, the Witte Committee, and the Witte family. Thank you all for going above and beyond to make our programs possible and to help us fulfill the Foundation's mission of providing funds to purchase valuable analog and digital resources for the library. You make our library card a powerful tool for everyone who wields it. To find out more about the foundation, how to support the Newport Beach Library, and to buy tickets for the upcoming Witte program with international artist Shazia Sikandar in conversation with Meg Linton, please visit our new website at nbplf.foundation. Now I'm going to hand you over to the chair of our Witte Committee, Janet Hadley, and she will introduce our distinguished guest who has promised us an informative and engaging evening about a topic that impacts us all. Janet, take it away.
Thank you, Kunga. Nice to see you again this evening. I miss all of my friends and relationships back in Newport Beach, California. I've been here in Massachusetts. I came for Thanksgiving and then COVID decided to show its ugly head in California. So I'll be back soon after my second vaccine. Thank you all so much for inviting us into your homes this evening. This is our third presentation from my living room here and from Kunga's office at home and from wherever our dear authors come to speak to us from. Many of you know that this series was founded 24 years ago in 1996 in honor of Martin Witte, a man who cherished libraries. And the purpose of our series is to offer the community the best speakers on the most timely topics. As Kunga mentioned, we could not do this without our sponsors. And remarkably this year, in the face of a pandemic, our sponsors all came forward not knowing what our programs would look like or how they would be happening and who would be able to attend. So sponsors, thank you, thank you, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I know how passionate the Witte Committee is in finding speakers to bring to our community. And the feedback we get is that this is important to our community. In line for recognition also tonight are Kunga, who you just met, and behind the scenes, Sean Baker. They are both the two members of our foundation team who make all of this happen. Tonight, we have the pleasure of hosting Sam Quinones. Originally, Sam was supposed to be with us last year. And when the Witte Committee first selected him, is when we were talking about a different epidemic. We were talking about the epidemic of increasing deaths from opioid use. Now we're preoccupied with a COVID pandemic, but our opioid problem has only become worse. Sam Quinones first came to my attention during a piece on NPR a number of years ago now. I heard him talking about his award-winning book, Dreamland, and within minutes of hearing him, and with the aid of our wonderful digital world, I had downloaded his book from Audible and was able to listen to it within minutes. I found his writing so compelling that I still remember many of the passages, a lot of the vivid imagery, and most of all, the deeply personal stories that he shared of people in the book. One of the other things I loved about the book was kind of a drumming rhythm in his style, sort of really bringing home the complexities and the how do I want to say this? The way people were driven to both use drugs, sell drugs, push drugs, give drugs out as prescriptions. It's a long and complicated story. Sam is a masterful storyteller. He's award-winning. A quick read through his very colorful history and years of living among the denizens of many countries and cities and villages quickly acquaint you with the deep connection that he has to his fellow man. Sam really develops relationships. He must have a very keen ear and a very welcoming countenance for people to share so much with him. Any budding nonfiction author would want to take a look through the details that Sam shares on samquinones.com. And I think you'll get a hint of some of the secrets that he uses to really get the story. He's lived in many interesting and very unusual places, and he's woven his way into local communities repeatedly. There are a number of local connections with Mr. Quinones. He grew up in Claremont. He went to Berkeley, studied economics and American history. And his first journalism job was with the Orange County Register. He later worked for the LA Times and for a lot of other publications in between. He lived for a lengthy period in Mexico, and from that he authored 2 collections of nonfiction stories. In 1998, he was awarded the prestigious Patricia Patterson Fellowship, one of the most prestigious fellowships in US print journalism, for a series of stories on impunity in Mexico. Tonight, we're pleased to have him with us. He is the author of Dreamland, a book that was so widely acclaimed that it garnered over 15 Best Book Awards from renowned publications, as well as receiving the National Book Critics Circle Award for Nonfiction. Sam has a lot to share with us tonight, and one other interesting thing happened between last year and this year is, and a lot of things can happen in a year, as you know, Sam authored a new book. So tonight we'll have not only the pleasure of hearing the man who wrote Dreamland tell us about it, but we'll also get to find out about his new book. Please join me in welcoming this really fascinating storyteller to the Witte tonight.
How you doing, Janet? Thank you very, very much. Very kind of you for that introduction. It's really great to be with you guys. And thank you also, Kunga. It's been wonderful working with you for what seems like a long time now. Yeah, since last Christmas. Christmas of 2019 or
a year
something.
Ago Christmas, yes.
Been a while.
Well,
but anyway,
Sam,
it's great to finally be with you guys.
Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Since we're going to get to learn some exciting things about your new book, I thought that we could just bring the audience up to speed with maybe a synopsis of Dreamland, and then perhaps you can give us a glimpse into your new book. And we'll also have time for questions from the audience.
Sure. Well, Dreamland was my attempt to bring all the threads of a story, of a national saga together, complicated story about how we went from one of the wealthiest country on earth became a country in which people were getting addicted and dying of drugs used to numb pain. Like you would think, like, what pain, right? And the story, I'll try to describe it briefly. We can go into some of the details if you like, but basically it has a few components. One was that pain specialists in the 1980s and 90s, doctors who specialized in pain management, began to argue that we did bad job of treating pain, and that and this was too bad because we had tools. They began to suggest that we have the tools now to eradicate pain, almost a mission to eradicate pain, kind of like a missionary zeal to do this. And this tool was narcotic painkillers, opioid painkillers, morphine, but then also oxycodone, hydrocodone, brand names like Vicodin and later OxyContin and so on. And they began to argue that we needed to make far greater use of these pills. They ran into lots of reluctance to do this because doctors had been trained not to use these except for in very, very limited circumstances, post-surgery and end of life. And that was really about it. And so they began to make the argument that we needed to use this and that these tools were not nearly as dangerous, as risky as many doctors had believed, and that when used to treat pain, these pills were virtually non-addictive. That was kind of a buzzword that began to circulate in the early 90s, into the mid 90s. They were joined in all this by pharmaceutical companies, particularly those who made these pills. They give them a megaphone. I don't think the pain specialists would have achieved what they were able to achieve without the money and the prestige and the lobbying power of several good chunk of the pharmaceutical industry that got involved in promoting this idea. And so together they form this kind of juggernaut. And certainly by the early 90s, mid 90s, you're seeing this a very, very powerful force in the media, in hospitals. There's a pain. We do an awful job of treating pain, which had some truth to it. And these pills should now be widely prescribed. And that was kind of like the beginning of all this. Of course, it also played into an idea that among Americans that we needed, that Americans increasingly wanted convenience, easy, quick solutions, all of that kind of thing. And this played into it too. We came to the doctor expecting cures, and the doctor now had a cure for our pain, and that was these opioid painkillers. And that's really how a lot of this story began.
There was also at the time, there also the introduction. I mean, I was a nurse. I'm still a nurse, but in my former life, I was just. It was just the beginning of asking people about their pain.
Yes.
So there were two other things going on.
Oh, absolutely. And there was this idea that you needed to gauge people's pain. So if you've been to the doctor, you know that 0 to 10 pain scale, maybe the smiley face, frowny face pain scale. The idea also was promoted that the pain should now be considered a vital sign, a fifth vital sign, except for the pain is not a vital sign. You know, right. A vital sign is really something that shows that you're alive. Pulse is a vital sign, you know, and you can measure that objectively almost any moment of the day. You have the machines ready, you can do that, or with your own arm, you can measure it. Pain, however, is not measurable. It's so subjective. What may be painful to you may not be to me, and vice versa. And so there was and then there were certain also very important medical institutions that undertook to use opioids for pain therapy. VA was a big one. VA is the largest health system in America. It's a huge, the JACO, which accredits hospitals, was also very big in this. There was a lot of this, American Pain Society, a lot of organizations began to push the idea, yeah, we need to eradicate pain. And all of a sudden, we had this idea that proposed that these were no longer known to be addictive when used to treat pain. Now, the problem is that there was no science backing that idea up. This was like wishful thinking on the part of people, because some people take opioids and have no problem. Other people take them and have a very serious problem with addiction. And so you got this kind of combination of stuff, all kind of a drumbeat. We need to cure pain. We need to eradicate pain together with Americans, our you know, you, me, everybody, our desire to kind of want to have be fixed quickly. And I think the pills played into that in a big way. Doctors felt good, you know, they felt almost like kind of a narcotic of having helped their patient, because the patient leaves happy. He's got his pill prescription and I'm happy to see him go. I don't have much time with my patients anymore because of managed care. So all of these factors seem to kind of like coalesce and push. And through the 1990s, you began to enter into the 2000s, and for the next decade or 15 years or so, you began to see this transform, and we began to see also an enormous coast to coast volume of supply of pills unleashed on the country, growing every year dramatically, like an airplane taking off from a tarmac. That's what the graph looks like, basically. And it's just unbelievable. And it because it's doctors, not drug dealers, the supply of pills is just colossal and is coast to coast. It's all every region of the country.
Right. And then another really important part of this foundation was, and I thought this was the strangest part of the whole story actually, was the non-existent literature upon which this was based.
Yeah, I you know, it's weird you say that. I spent a month trying to get my mind around the idea that science would be based on a letter to the editor. Science would, medical practice would change based on a letter to the editor. I was like, I'm a crime reporter at heart, you know, I don't have a science background really. And yet here was this letter written by a doctor in Boston, Herschel Jick, who ran a database of hospital patient records. At the time, he told me there was like 300,000 patient records. And he would occasionally ask questions of this data. How, you know, and one day he asked the question, how many people were given narcotics while in hospital, and how many of those people got addicted? Well, the first number was something like 12,000, and the second number was 4. So he writes up a letter to the editor, New England Journal of Medicine, saying, it was an FYI. We've noticed that people who are given narcotics in hospital rarely get addicted. Now, remember, his data was from the 60s and 70s. He wrote this letter in 1979. And back then, yes, you were given opioids very rarely and only with strict hospital supervision and in small quantities, you know, none of this take a bottle home with you stuff, right? And so he writes this letter. They publish it in New England Journal of Medicine in 1980, January 1980, where it's completely forgotten until these pain specialists come upon it several years later as proof of the idea. They don't have any science to back up the idea that opioid painkillers are non-addictive when used to treat pain. So they're looking desperately for some science, and they find this one letter under the heading, an unfortunate heading, addiction rare in patients treated with narcotics. And they grab that and they begin to quote it and cite it in journal articles and so on. And they begin to quote it at conferences and continuing medical education seminars and so on. Pharmaceutical companies pick up on it and say, do you know that only less than 1% of all people who are treated with these get addicted, with these pills get addicted? It becomes then in common, nobody reads it. Nobody's consulted really, because it's in a dusty bin in the back of a medical school library. No one's got time to do that. And so they begin to quote it, and it becomes then a report. And then it becomes a study. And then it becomes a landmark report. And finally, it's a landmark study that does much to change what we know about addiction and la-di-da. That's what was in Time magazine, okay? And what this does, this becomes the gospel for this opioid revolution in pain management in America, right? There's no science to show that this is true. The doctor who wrote that said, I didn't mean anything like that. I didn't mean that you should then start writing prescriptions and sending big bottles of stuff and refills home with people. I just was saying, based on what I saw, you know, when drugs are very, very controlled within a hospital, people don't get addicted to them. He was right about that. But it became this bizarre example of how people would change medical practice based on like a little letter. You know, I couldn't believe it myself. I share your amazement at the whole thing. It was a bizarre episode, but very, very influential. It's called the Porter-Jick letter, and it helped change attitudes with regard to whether we should be even prescribing these things at all, and how much and in what circumstances and how many refills and all the rest.
Well, so you start with that as the support for the prescribing so vigorously, and then it kind of bifurcates. And in my mind, it bifurcates into physicians who see this as an opportunity to make money. And then I also, again, because I was in nursing, over here I can see the drug reps with the donuts and the pens and the free this and a special dinner here.
That's a huge part of the story. That is it's important you mention that, because this was the go-go Wild West days, the mid-90s to the mid-2000s, 2007 or 8 or so, were the kind of the Wild West days of pharmaceutical sales. Before that, it was a lot of guys, most of them guys, older men, gray suits, a lot of them with pharmacy or medicine backgrounds, right? I mean, maybe you remember these guys. They were of the neighborhood, of the community. They saw them at church or the Friday night football games or the Chamber of Commerce. They knew what they were talking about. Doctors would consult with them. They were very, very chary to do any hard sell. They didn't do that. That was not part of their world. They were trying to be lifelong suppliers for the doctors in the region. So they had to be absolutely credible. Well, in the mid-1990s, we go through a revolution. All those guys are on their way to retirement. In their place begins a Salesforce arms race, right? All the companies hiring more and more and more and more guys. And it's young people out of college, a lot of people from the military, from athletics, a lot of cheerleaders, people who have no background in pharmacy or medicine. They don't know what they're selling, but they do know how to sell it, right? And that is what begins to take place. So in 1995, the figure is, I think we had 38,000 drug sales reps in America. By, I think it was 2001 or 2, right in there, we have 102,000 drug sales reps, like locusts. After a while, you can't get away from them. Doctors were getting, before they maybe got 10 visits a week. Now it's 10 a day. They don't know. And it's like constant, and they're giving them all this stuff. And what they mainly give these doctors, though, very, very important. They understand this crucial thing, neuroscientifically very important, is food, right? Yep. You break bread with people. We have grown to really find a common, a kind of a feel-good place for eating with people. And so they are constantly bringing lunch and all that stuff. And this is how a lot of this gets started as well, because it is just a force of nature. Now, a lot of companies were using these salespeople to sell hypertension drugs or cholesterol drugs or what have you, big blockbusters. A few of these companies, particularly the company Purdue Pharma that makes OxyContin, was using these folks to sell exclusively a narcotic, OxyContin with the narcotic oxycodone in it, but it was using these kind of go-go sales tactics to sell a narcotic, sell a heroin-like product, basically.
So now you've got, it's such a, what's that game? Is it Jenga or something where you pull pieces out and then the whole thing collapses? I'm just thinking, so you've got a new drug and you've got the sale of it being takes off on this really no research at all, but this sort of something that gets built into being the substantive information about its usefulness. Then you've got people willing and eager to sell. And then you've got these doctors, I'm thinking about the Ohio area and the first pain pusher.
It became it became a business for some people. Now, some doctors very reluctant to get into this. It bears mentioning a lot of doctors were like, what is going on? But they were pushed and pushed and pushed. Other doctors were more eager. And some doctors, it was sold to doctors as a boon. This is going to help your most pesky patients who spend an hour talking to you about their chronic pain and so on. You're going to be able to get rid of them real quick now. The problem was that it turned into a curse for a lot of doctors. They lost their moral compass. They began selling prescriptions, or what looked to be basically selling prescriptions, cash, long lines, people coming from all over the various counties, maybe even various states to get their prescriptions done. And you began to see this in scattered ways across the country, but very intense ways, first in in the Appalachian areas of like Southern Ohio, West Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, Eastern Tennessee. Pill mills were notorious. And then after that was kind of more or less shut down or controlled to some degree, it really exploded in Florida, where they didn't apparently care. And their main customers were all from that Appalachian area. So this was part of what exploded the supply too. But I have to say that those were really the outliers. That was not the majority. You could not tell the story based only on the experience of those doctors. It was doctors across the country, hospitals, the VA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, across the country, either being pushed or eagerly embracing this new method for controlling pain, on the belief that there was no addictive risk from these pills, so long as the patient was a pain patient. And there was, again, some people were mightily helped. It's bears mentioning. A lot of people were very well helped by this, and a lot of people were not. A lot of people were damaged for life with addiction, and then sometimes dying. So that's kind of like the beginnings of all this. And then of course heroin gets into the mix.
And then you've got the federal government looking at some of these communities where thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of pills are being prescribed. And they seem very slow to respond. Well,
I think that's because a couple of reasons. You're seeing this problem happen in Appalachia. And, Americans have the tendency to look at Appalachia like another problem in Appalachia. A lot of it's self-caused, so why do we care, right? They were really the canary in the coal mine, actually, early on in that, and nobody paid much attention because it was Appalachia. It was the Rust Belt too. People have been kind of the losers in free trade and all that. And also I have to say this, that when people began to, and that eventually spread, it has spread to suburban areas that done best in the rollouts, in the expansion, the economic expansion of the previous 30 years. But it hit a lot of middle class families who were then very, very ashamed and mortified and kept it quiet. So this thing spread beyond Appalachia based on silence, in my opinion. There was like, nobody wanted to talk about it. It was like the early days of the AIDS epidemic. You remember when everybody, no, my son, don't put AIDS in the obituary of my son. He died of cancer, right? Well, the same thing happened here. He died of a heart attack. He died unexpectedly at home at 27 or whatever, It was that kind of thing where you had this silence. Nobody wanted to talk about it. That's something that's very new. This has been going on for 15, 20 years before, since about 2015, frankly, I think we began to see this new awareness that's grown over the last few years. But I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that a lot of families were so mortified, so ashamed that their son or daughter or husband or uncle or grandfather even had died in this way, and kept it quiet. And I think a lot of the slowness of the federal government to react was simply that politicians, except for in a few areas, did not feel urgency coming up from below, from constituents. No one wanted to talk about it. I think that's really a big part of why this all took place.
Yeah, I have a dear friend who works in the mental health field, and she says, no one brings you flowers or a cake when your kid dies from a drug overdose, schizophrenia, bipolar, things that people don't talk about very much. Well, one of the so then one other major aspect of your book is, of course, the really brilliant marketing scheme when heroin comes into the picture.
Yeah, it's important to understand that all this was going on. All of this was going on, and we were oblivious to a fundamental change that would also affect all this, that had already basically taken place by the mid-1990s, and that was a transformation of our heroin markets. Now, heroin for decades really had come from the Far East, come from Turkey, the French Connection, had come from Burma or Thailand, whatever, crossed all the continents and oceans and got to New York City, and then was distributed through a lot of the country. And that heroin got here expensive and very weak because it just come from so long. Heroin is a commodity. It's like salt, you know, something like that. And so you cut it to make money. You just cut it. You put a lot of stuff in it, and you double your quantity, and you sell it for twice. You know, you make twice what you paid. In the 1980s, though, and so if you watch The French Connection, if you watch Serpico, you watch these great movies in the 1970s, that's what they're describing, that situation. 1980s, all that changes. All the Colombians with their cocaine start bringing in heroin as well. Mexicans start bringing in heroin. They're not quite to where the Colombians are, but they're getting there. And of course, now, of course, they dominate everything. But our heroin trade started coming really from Latin America. And because it had so short a distance to come, and no oceans to cross, basically, it got here every year cheaper and every year more potent. And so by the time we had people who were addicted to these pills, because these pills absolutely were addictive for the wrong people who had backgrounds that should have been noticed before they were prescribed these things, doctors began to cut them off. They began to have trouble finding the pills, maybe insurance maybe was ended or something like this. And they began to look for pills elsewhere, usually on the street. Well, on the street, those pills formed black markets. In almost every region of the country, there was a black market in pain pills because of the supply was so big. And those on the street, those pills cost $1 a milligram. So if you're doing 150, 200 milligrams of oxycodone or hydrocodone or whatever it is a day, that's 150 bucks, 200 bucks a day. You cannot sustain that. You begin looking for alternatives. And it's that at that moment when increasingly people begin to see, bing, nobody had noticed that change in our heroin markets until that moment. And then all of a sudden people go, oh, I could buy heroin for a fifth the price, right? A fifth the price, and it would last me longer than these pills. And that's when as soon as OxyContin comes out, OxyContin begins to take people up to very, very high doses of opiates per day. And as soon as that comes out, people begin to then search for cheaper ways of satisfying their now habits, and they turn to Mexican heroin. I don't believe we would have the opioid problem, the heroin problem we have today, if all our heroin was coming from the Far East. It just got here too expensive and was too weak to be a proper substitute for OxyContin. But because we had heroin coming in from Mexico and for a long time, Colombia too, you had this, it was very potent and very cheap, and it was a perfect substitute. It was cheaper, more potent, and so people began switching. The guys who figured this out first were the guys that I wrote about in my book, from a small little village in the Pacific coast of Mexico in the state of Nayarit, who developed a system for selling heroin retail. Now, most Mexican traffickers sell wholesale. They don't bother with retail. But these guys were retailers selling 1/10 of a gram doses of heroin as if it were pizza. So you could call up in any town, Cincinnati, Reno, Charlotte, wherever it was, Orange County, big time, LA, big time, San Fernando Valley is where they actually started. You could call up and they would have these little cells, usually an operator and 2 or 3 drivers driving around, and you call the operator, they circulate the number at methadone clinics, and pretty soon everybody knows the number. They start calling and then start ordering, can I get 2 grams sent to me? I'm gonna be over at the Burger King parking lot over off of this highway, you know. And so from this one little town, Jalisquillo, in the state of Nayarit, they developed this system of selling heroin like pizza, right? So order up and all that. They did it they did it without guns. They didn't want to be caught with guns, because they get caught with guns, you're illegally in the country. Caught with guns, and heroin, that's a 10-year prison sentence minimum. They knew that they would just be kicked loose. You know, they all dress very down. There's no bling, no fancy cars or parties, anything like that. They look like Home Depot day laborers, basically. They get arrested and they get sent, and they get arrested. And new folks are sent up, because all the guys who run the cells are down in Nayarit. They're saying, okay, I need 4 more guys to go up to Lexington or up to, you know, Seattle or someplace, or Albuquerque. And the interesting thing about this town was they were not the only ones to sell black tar heroin, which was what they were selling. Looks like kind of Tootsie Rolls, basically. It's a heroin, looks like Tootsie Roll, basically. But they were the first because of this system. They very expansionary, always looking for virgin markets, always looking for new places. And a lot of guys coming up wanting to work because they see their buddies are doing it. They see their buddies at the fiestas back home and spending money, their families buying land and new used trucks and all the rest. And they begin to spread. And they happen to be in the area of Appalachia, Ohio, basically, right as the pills start taking off. And they come to realize through a few key members of that organization, of that town, that if they just follow the pills, they will have a huge new market for their heroin. And they figured that out in 1998. I mean, 23 years ago, they already knew what was going to happen. They were way on top of this long before, because they were retailers and they saw the business angle.
It's the sort of upside down pyramid shape of this whole thing is kind of astounding. So I know that you end the book on a more hopeful note about how people who've been dealing with addiction start to come to terms and take care of themselves and treat it. So I'd like to segue into your new book, but I was reading the CDC report saying that 81,000 people had died in 2020 from drug overdose.
And I think that's going to be way low.
Way low. I know. In Massachusetts, they were saying they actually didn't have time to report drug overdose deaths right now. They used to do it every week. Now they do it every month because they're so taken up with COVID, and our public health system has just falling into just the skeletal.
I think it's going to be closer to 100,000. The new book basically updates what's happening since then. And what we've done is, through the opioid epidemic, we awakened Mexican traffickers. Primarily now it's just Mexico. Colombia's kind of fallen away, at least when it comes to trafficking into the United States. We awakened them to the idea that, first of all, that there was this new market of opioid addicts. And when I lived in Mexico, people didn't really want to deal with heroin too much. There was heroin dealers, heroin traffickers, but mostly they were interested in cocaine, and that was the kind of the sexy drug, and marijuana that made a lot of money and so on. And then all of a sudden we had this whole thing and exploded, and we made and there was all this new market up there. Along the way, though, they figure out that the era really of growing drugs from the land, plant-based drugs, is really kind of passé. It's the new profit center is in making drugs chemically. They learned this already because they'd already dominated the methamphetamine market. They began making methamphetamine in the late 80s and really had mastered it by the end of the 90s and controlled a lot of the market west of the Mississippi River. And then along they're heavily dealing heroin, and along they discover fentanyl. And that's really the discovery of fentanyl by the Mexican trafficking groups is one part of the drug story that is in my next book. And it's just extraordinarily potent, very, very cheap, very easy to smuggle. A small amount will make you a huge profit. And of course, it's extraordinarily deadly when used the wrong way. Now, fentanyl is a fantastic drug. I had a heart attack 4 years ago. They gave me fentanyl, magnificent drug. It revolutionized anesthesia surgery in America, and it is, when used properly, it is a fantastic drug. When mixed by drug traffickers, it's not. And so that's really what we're seeing now. And this is what the next book is trying to get across. We're in a new era. The era, say, of recreational drug use is over, because fentanyl is now mixed into almost everything: cocaine, methamphetamine, marijuana. I mean, it's crazy, and counterfeit pills too. They understood. Fentanyl allowed the drug traffickers in Mexico to take advantage of Americans' love affair with pills. Right? Before fentanyl, they knew that we loved our pills, but they had no way of really making pills in the, that would be as potent as they needed to be, and that kind of thing, kind of a counterfeit oxycodone generics and counterfeit hydrocodone generics, all that stuff. Now they're doing it, and they're putting, instead of oxycodone or hydrocodone, they're putting in small amounts of fentanyl. They're doing that with Xanax too, counterfeit Xanax. Counterfeit pills are now the huge thing, and that has been allowed because that's been possible because the traffickers now have unlimited amounts of fentanyl. And so what matters now is not the land. It doesn't matter the geography or how well the plants grow at a certain altitude, none of that. What really matters now is your access to ports. Ports give you access to world chemical markets, can give you access to all the ingredients that you now need to make methamphetamine. And the whole story of methamphetamine is, of course, a whole entirely different story. It's different from methamphetamine, from fentanyl, but it's equally scary because the way they make methamphetamine now, they had to change their method years ago. The way they make it now is more complicated, more waste product, but also easier to make because they can use all kinds of chemicals and all kinds of chemical hacks to develop certain ingredients. And the problem with the new methamphetamine now is that it has been shown to be creating mental illness very quickly, ravaging people's brains, creating symptoms of schizophrenia, even in people who are 40, 50 years old. Schizophrenia is a young person's malady. And so there's paranoia, hallucinations, and of course, huge rates of homelessness. I believe that a very sizable chunk of our national homeless problem is due, in fact, to the methamphetamine that they're making down in Mexico in the last 10 years. But this is really to say that we're in an era of the synthetic drug now. They made synthetic drugs in the past, but nothing on the scale of fentanyl and methamphetamine in the last 6-8 years has just really taken over drug use and the drug supply in America.
So somehow you get to find all this information, which isn't, exactly available on the web. I was very surprised in talking to my hairdresser about this years ago when I read the book, and she said, well, haven't you ever looked on Craigslist? And I said, no. So she stopped cutting my hair, took out Craigslist and said, look, go to this Starbucks because they do black tar roofing, or there are all these different ways that people included black tar in a phrase. And she said, this is very easy to get. I was just stunned.
Same on Craigslist also has, they've cut down somewhat on it, but the other day I was looking on Craigslist in LA, you look for China white plates, China white plates. I can't remember what they're called, exactly how the phrase is, but you'll see all these legitimate ads with plates, pictures of plates, and then you'll see a few that don't have any plates. And you look up the ad, and it'll be veiled reference to good quality and I can be trusted and all. That's just the selling fentanyl, basically.
Well, it's that is shocking. Shocking and feels overwhelming, and knowing families that are devastated and destroyed by this. I know in Newport Beach, as you can imagine, is a beach community. There are parts of the city that are more seasonal, but there are so many recovery houses. And now, just like everything else, it turns out these recovery houses are not that well controlled as far as standards of treatment, et cetera. So a lot of people are left losing a lot of money, losing a family member, having to deal with a family member, mental illness, et cetera. You ended, I want to leave some time for questions from our audience. You ended Dreamland on a hopeful note.
Right.
And you mentioned that in your new book, which is called The Least of Us. And I love that we can see behind you, we can see your storyboard, shall we call it?
Yeah, there we go. There's all my chapters. I can't wait to take them down. They've been up for like a year and a half. I'm ready. The book's almost done, and anyway, but that's kind of like how I work anyway. Yeah, right. Uh-huh.
Well, I hope that the pen is mightier than the sword of fentanyl here. So now go on and give us some hope.
Well, I think the idea that I came upon with Dreamland was that this was not about, this was a story only superficially about drug trafficking and drug companies, right? That's how I started it. As along the way, I began to realize actually the bigger story here is about community destruction in America, isolation and community destruction. And the way we defeat that, it seems to me, the only way we defeat that, our only defense, I think, is community strengthening. And I think that is where this whole thing ties into the pandemic as well, which has taught us what the opioid epidemic was also teaching us in the process of teaching us, which is that we have spent 30 years, 40 years in this country destroying community, finding ways not to be together, building big houses on lonesome streets, or in towns where it's devastated by job loss, half the town leaves and the rest of the town is like goes indoors, and there's a million ways, and on the screens constantly, nobody's outside. It's a very barren social life, it seems, frequently. And to me, that is, and of course the pandemic has shown us how toxic, absolutely toxic that can be. It can cause depression and so on. That's what we get when we see all of our social connections stripped away. Right, and we have almost none, and we could see that is really the essence of who we are. We evolved to be community-oriented group people. That's how we survived. That's how we fended off the tigers that wanted to eat us thousands and thousands of years ago, right? And so no, it's part of who we are. And so to me, strengthening defenses of community, building back those things in doing, and I think it gets down to low-tech stuff, cookouts, being outside with neighbors, planning, organizing things so people come together and get to know one another, because frequently we do not. We live next to 2 doors down from, so we don't have a clue who that person is. And a lot of what the roots of a lot of what we are suffering from now, particularly when it comes to things like the opioid epidemic, I think are rooted in that we need to find to get back to the kind of community life that, and sometimes this requires, again, intentional planning to achieve. It used to happen organically, just happen. People, when I grew up, I was out of doors from the time I got home from school to the time the lights went down, the sun went down, right? And that does not happen anymore. And I think the problem, and the pandemic is showing us that this is and the pandemic is also showing us what I think the opioid epidemic was showing us which was we are only as strong as the most vulnerable among us, right? The least of us. We are only as strong as the least of us. That's why I titled the book that way. It comes from the book of Matthew, roughly, in the Bible. I really believe that we're only as strong as that meat packer in Kansas, who may or may not have health insurance before he goes to work, or the grocery store clerk, or the addict eating from the trash. We need to understand that we cannot escape. We are connected in many ways, even though we don't want to be. We are connected. We cannot escape some of this stuff by isolating ourselves in our houses. We need to be part of a larger community. And to me, that is the best defense for a drug trafficking world that can come up with all these diabolical things, for frankly, a corporate consumer product world that comes up with legal addictive sugar and chicken nuggets and pornography and gambling and social media and on and on and on and on and on. We are bombarded with addictive stuff. And the only way to, I think, to develop a defense is to build a new bulwarks of community, starting at the most basic level, the street, the neighbors, being among each other. And that may be naive. It doesn't sound very skeptical and hardened for a reporter who's been, so you're supposed to get all hardened when you're a journalist for 30 years plus. And I'm not. I believe in that. I believe in Americans' resilience and ability to to do that. That's kind of why the book is titled the way, the least of us, the way it is, because I do believe that it's when we understand that and we act on that, then we become stronger. Remember, the most important foreign policy initiative in the history of modern foreign policy was the Marshall Plan, in which we endeavored to help people who were flat on their back. We won, they won, the Soviets were stopped on their tracks. It was like there's no unintended consequences from the Marshall Plan. And I think that's the idea I want to get across.
Well, I have to just tell you, segue into something, and we could go on for a long time, but I just have to tell you, we had
Sure.
PJ O'Rourke as our speaker last month.
Sure.
And he said exactly what you just said about the Marshall Plan.
Oh, did he? Okay. Well, I'm glad
So
we're on the same page.
We've got comedians talking about that, and we've got you talking about that.
Yeah.
So we have about 7 more minutes left. I just want, since you're on the subject of community, you're doing something about that yourself with your work. This is a nice tie for the importance of community and libraries. Tell us about your work with the East Los Angeles Library.
Well, I'm not doing it at the moment because I've just, writing a book just takes too much time. But for a number of years, 5 years, I did writing workshops available to people all over the county. It's funded by the LA County at East LA Public Library, in which the idea was to get people to come in and tell their stories, not in one day. It was more like a 8-week seminar in which they wrote stories, and then I very, very aggressively edited them and gave it back to them bathed in red. One of my mottos was embrace the red. The red is good for you. Don't be discouraged by all the red marks that I put on your stuff. That's good. If the bad thing would be if I turned it into you, I didn't have any way of telling you what was wrong with it, you know. So anyway, that went on. We published a book of them. You can find these on Amazon. We published 9 books of stories. It's on Amazon, called Tell Your True Tale. I also have a website where you can read a lot of these stories. I think I have maybe 50 or 60 of them up on my website, a storytelling website called tellyourtruetale.com. But it was also a way of kind of bringing together people who wanted to write and wanted to be among other writers and didn't have the way to do it, didn't know what their next step was, and that kind of thing. And a number of them ended up taking it several times, 3, 4, 5 times, and the stories got very, very good, very exciting to watch, all that. So that was kind of one of the ways that I was, wanting to be a writer. You're spending all your time alone. That also was isolating, and so I needed to kind of get out. I want to try to get back into that in some way in the next couple of years. We'll see if that's possible.
We have questions that are all very much related to, so thank you for that. I'm picturing the before times with people coming together in a library and having their voices heard and then being taught how to express themselves more. So that in and of itself is a great way of healing our community. We have questions that have to do with the $573 million settlement to what is it? What is your perspective on the recent consulting giant McKinsey's multi-million-dollar settlement to cover the state's opioid claims? And are there other companies and industries that you feel are culpable?
Well, McKinsey was working with a lot of these companies, trying to find them more effective ways of selling opioids. And particularly, they were working with Purdue Pharma, and they came up with a number of ways. In fact, this is part of the next book, because this has been fully detailed by the Massachusetts Attorney General's office in their reports on this. That's another thing that's happened and recently is all these lawsuits have all the subpoena power, all these attorneys general have divulged all these new records that I never had access to. So that was been also very interesting to look at. But McKinsey, one of the things McKinsey suggested that Purdue did not adopt, but the idea was to pay a rebate to the different pharmacy chains for everybody who died So if they estimated, for example, CVS would lose, oh guys, something like 2,000 people, 2,000 customers to, and within a year's time. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but it's something like that. And that Purdue should then pay them, pay CVS $14,000 per customer to keep them stocking OxyContin. It was this kind of stuff. It's just bizarre, outrageous. Some of this stuff was kind of normal, but remember, they're trying to find ways to help a company sell a narcotic. I mean, you might as well go down to the drug dealer and say, yeah, let's figure out how you can better sell your heroin, man. That kind of thing. All of this is, these are strategies that are fine when the product is not a narcotic. When it's a car or, I don't know, anything else that's not highly addictive, then it's fine. And when it becomes a narcotic, all of a sudden it takes on a very ominous tone. And that's kind of, the other thing, and answer to the question, was that there are a number of lawsuits still outstanding against pharmaceutical companies. I suspect that these will begin to be kind of processed and gone through over the next few years. Johnson & Johnson already pleaded guilty in Oklahoma, and there's a lot of that going on. But what I find interesting is, when I was writing Dreamland, when I wrote it, I thought nobody was going to read this book because nobody wanted to talk about it. Everyone was silent, everyone was quiet. There were 3 lawsuits at that time. This was when I turned my book in. It was 3 lawsuits: Santa Clara County, Orange County, and Chicago. Now there are close to 3,000. Okay, counties all across the country. Huge numbers of counties have sued. Virtually every, as far as I know, I think every attorney general in the United States has sued. A state attorney general has sued a lot of these companies. And then you got tribes, you got cities, you got a lot of other lawsuits. So it gives you an idea of how the awareness of this problem has exploded since the book came out. It's just been very, very dramatic, and something I was not expecting at all.
But then they can sue all of the companies they want. You've got this whole illegal trade that's underneath everything. And
what we've done by believing in magic bullet answers to complicated questions. A complicated question is, what do we do about human pain? Very, very complex. It involves the brain and individuals' environment and trauma and all the rest, all these very complicated things. And the easy, quick magic bullet answer is one pill for everybody. So as a culture, we bought into that for 20 years, right? That opened up, that doesn't lead anywhere good. These magic bullet answers don't lead anywhere good, in my opinion. You can see this over and over, but in this case, for sure not. And what ended up happening was you open up this Pandora's box. Now everybody, now fentanyl, now Mexican traffickers have figured out all these new ways of packaging. A value-added proposition is to add fentanyl to these counterfeit pills, and all of a sudden you can charge triple or whatever. You're right. I mean, the problem is dire and severe, and we need to learn how to build community to the point where it doesn't matter what they come up with. Doesn't matter. We've already, in the book I say we need to cut down on social media. I personally don't eat sugar anymore. I just cut it out entirely from my diet. We don't have cable. All of that kind of stuff is a part of this whole addictive soup, toxic addictive soup that we live in daily, that I think is so important to confront constantly. Really is calling on us to re-examine how we live, what we eat, how much exercise we get, how much time we spend around other people, and that kind of thing. And you get into some very profound. I found that you start very small, and then you begin to understand that this is a very, very profound story that deals with the entire country, the kind of idea of who we are as Americans, what we become as a country.
Well, if we could add in a national service program, it might replace our old public school system. I don't know. I just think of how few opportunities the layers of our society have to mix together. And so I personally feel attracted to exploring something as simple as simple idea of a national service program. Well, I have many, many, many questions for you. And the only way we can possibly solve that is to have you come back.
I would love to. Yeah, it's been great. You know, I know when you guys said, well, we'll talk for an hour, I know it's like, I was going in the back of my mind, well, yeah, I mean, that's great. It's been wonderful talking with you. That you can go on and on and on, because these are huge questions. This is one of the most important topics of our time. And
Huge questions, but I have no idea how you do it. But the stories that I can't encourage our audience, if they haven't read it yet, read Dreamland as soon as you can. The details and the way you weave yourself into people's lives and the things that they share
Thank
with
you.
you, really an extraordinary capacity that you have. But then reading
Thank
your
you.
history, or the history that you publish,
Uh-huh.
it's like, oh, well, now I get it. From playing guitar in Europe and earning your way through there, and all the places you've lived and all the people you've met and interacted with, you are a great storyteller. So
Thank you, Jenna.
thank you enough for being part of the 24th season of Witte and for bearing with us through the epidemic, the pandemic, Zoom. And the next time we'd love to see you in person.
Oh, it's been great. It's been really great doing that. Yeah, and I love talking about this. And you know what? It's weird. For millennia, writers have had no way of being in touch with their readers. And now with Zoom and Skype, before that actually, all of a sudden you can connect up with your readers in a profound way. And so a really almost personal kind of touch way. So I love doing it. I love talking about this stuff. So anyway, thank you all very, very much. Thanks to your audience as well. And yeah, hopefully we can do it again when the next book comes out. We'll see.
Okay. Thank you. Good luck, Sam.